The box was small, unassuming. A simple cardboard cube that promised to unravel the very fabric of Alex's being. It sat on the kitchen counter, a stark white contrast to the worn dark granite, its presence both mundane and monumental. For weeks, advertisements for the DNA testing kit had haunted Alex's social media feeds, a persistent algorithm sensing a deep, unspoken yearning. It was a yearning born from countless family gatherings where stories of ancestors felt like borrowed tales, legends belonging to other people. Alex's own history was a blurry photograph, all smiles, and vague generalities with no compelling narratives of immigration, hardship, or royal lineage to share over drinks with friends. A late-night scroll, fueled by a glass of wine and a profound sense of disconnection, had finally culminated in a click. The purchase was an impulse, a whimsical lunge toward identity. Now holding the kit, Alex felt a thrill of anticipation. The process was clinical yet intimate, a long-stemmed swab scraped against the inside of a cheek, collecting invisible fragments of self. Each cell held a story, a map written in a language Alex was about to learn how to read. The swab was sealed in its sterile vial, a message in a bottle tossed into a vast genetic ocean, and the box was mailed off with a silent, hopeful prayer for interesting results. Alex imagined discovering a splash of unexpected ethnicity, a dash of something exotic to spice up the predictable family tree. A long-lost cousin in a distant country, a story worth telling. It was a search for connection, for a past that felt more tangible, more theirs. Little did Alex know that the story waiting to be uncovered was not a quaint tale for a dinner party, but a seismic truth that would crack the foundation of everything known to be true. The days that followed were a study in exquisite anticipation. The sterile white box was gone, its contents embarked on a journey to some distant laboratory, but its absence only magnified its presence in Alex's mind. A new ritual took root in the household, one of compulsive email checking. Every morning, before the first sip of coffee had even warmed Alex's throat, the phone was in hand, fingers swiping down to refresh the inbox, hoping to see the subject line that would change everything. The afternoons were punctuated by the same hopeful gesture, and the evenings often ended with one last, longing look at the screen. Alex's imagination, once a quiet thing, now ran wild with possibilities. Perhaps the test would reveal a sliver of a heritage never whispered at family reunions, a trace of Nordic, sailor or Romany traveler hidden deep within the strands of DNA. Maybe there was a story of a great-great-grandparent who crossed an ocean under a different name, leaving a trail of forgotten relatives in their wake. Alex pictured a sprawling network of third and fourth cousins scattered across the globe. A ready-made international family, just waiting for an introduction. These flights of fancy became a shared joke with Jamie, a way to temper the eager anxiety of the wait. Over dinners of roasted vegetables and pasta, Alex would spin out increasingly elaborate scenarios. Perhaps they were descended from a lost European nobility, a claim that would necessitate the immediate purchase of a castle. Or maybe there was a secret lineage of celebrated artists, explaining Alex's hitherto undiscovered but deeply felt talent for interpretive dance. Jamie would listen, a warm, indulgent smile playing on their lips, adding their own ridiculous embellishments to the fantasy family tree. Their laughter would fill the kitchen, a bright counterpoint to the silent, patient wait for the truth. But beneath the humor was a genuine, thrumming excitement, a shared curiosity about the story about to be told. The wait was a blank page, and together, they filled it with every beautiful, impossible, wonderful story except the one that was actually coming. The email arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, its subject line deceptively simple. Your genetic insights are ready. Alex's breath caught, fingers hovering over the phone screen as if it might burn. The weeks of waiting, of imagined histories, and playful speculation crystallized into this single moment. The world outside the window seemed to still, the usual hum of traffic fading into a distant murmur as Alex tapped the notification, heart hammering against ribs. The website loaded with agonizing slowness, each spinning icon a tiny torment. Then it appeared, a dashboard promising revelations, a digital map of self. The first section glowed with vibrant, multicolored pie charts and percentages, a breakdown of ethnicity estimates. Alex's eyes skimmed over regions and percentages broadly European. A trace of North African, exactly the kind of mildly interesting but unsurprising mix that had been anticipated. It was the stuff of dinner party anecdotes, a conversation starter, and nothing more. A faint smile touched Alex's lips. Jamie would get a kick out of the 1% that was unassigned, a mystery they could joke about for weeks. But the real draw, the true purpose of this entire endeavor, lay in the next tab. DNA relatives. This was where the stories lived, the connections waiting to be made. Alex clicked, a fresh wave of anticipation surging. The page populated with a list of usernames and profile pictures, each accompanied by a predicted relationship and a shared DNA percentage. Most were distant cousins, fourth cousins and beyond, their shared genetic material measured in mere fragments. Alex scrolled, the initial thrill beginning to settle into a pleasant curiosity. Then the screen stopped. The scrolling finger froze. Halfway down the list, one match was categorically different from all the others. The label was not distant cousin, or even first cousin. It was bolded, stark and impossible. Close family sibling. The estimated shared DNA was a staggering 49.8%. The blood drained from Alex's face, a cold numbness spreading from the core outward. The phone felt suddenly heavy, alien in a hand that had gone slack. The cheerful, brightly colored interface seemed to warp and mock the single devastating line of text, rewriting a lifetime in an instant. All the imagined stories of sailors and artists evaporated, replaced by the terrifying silent question hanging in the air. Asterisk, a sibling? The words on the screen did not change. They remained fixed, a brutal, unyielding truth in a sea of digital data. Asterisk, close family sibling. Alex's mind, reeling, tried to reject the information, to force it into a more palatable shape. A glitch. It had to be a glitch. The testing company had made a catastrophic error, confusing data, mixing up samples. Alex's eyes, wide and unblinking, scanned the line again, clinging to the desperate hope of a mistake. But the percentage was there, a cold mathematical certainty, 49.8%. A number that screamed of shared parents, of a bond that was supposed to be known, not discovered by accident in an email. A trembling finger tapped the match, opening the profile. The username was simple, ordinary. Miage22. The profile picture showed a woman in her late 20s, smiling warmly against a backdrop of autumn trees. She had Alex's nose. She had their mother's eyes. The resemblance was not vague or suggestive. It was a punch to the gut, an undeniable echo of family features staring back from the screen. Below the picture, the full name was listed, Maya Johnson, and beside it, a scientific verdict that shattered Alex's world. 99% probability of being a full sibling. The air in the room grew thick and hard to breathe. The phone slipped from numb fingers, clattering onto the wooden desk. The sound was jarringly loud in the profound silence that had descended. A sibling. A full sister. Not a cousin, not a half-sibling from some long-forgotten affair, but a person who shared the same two parents. How? The question echoed in the hollow space of Alex's skull, a frantic, panicked rhythm. How could this be? Their childhood had been a closed-circle mother, Father Alex. No whispers of another pregnancy. No hidden hospital stays, no faded photographs of a baby that disappeared. Their parents, the architects of this reality, had built a life on a foundation of absolute truth, or so Alex had believed. Every birthday, every holiday, every scraped knee and proud moment had been shared within that unbreakable unit of three. Now that foundation was not just cracked, it was vaporized. The walls of the familiar study seemed to warp and lean inward. A cold sweat broke out on Alex's skin, a visceral reaction to the tectonic shift occurring within. This was not the intriguing mystery Alex had paid for. This was a secret, a monumental, life-altering secret that had been kept with terrifying efficiency for nearly 3 decades. The whimsical search for a story had instead uncovered a lie, and the panic that set in was a wild, clawing thing. Born from the terrifying realization that the people Alex trusted most in the world were strangers, the phone in Alex's hand felt like a block of ice, its smooth surface offering no comfort, only a cold conduit to a truth that was already curdling in the air. The study, once a sanctuary of books and quiet thought, now felt like a cage, its walls pressing in with the weight of the secret they had contained for so long. Maya's face, that smiling, familiar face, was burned onto the back of Alex's eyelids, a ghost demanding to be acknowledged. The silence in the room was a physical presence, thick and heavy, broken only by the ragged, shallow sound of Alex's own breathing. There was no more room for doubt, for rationalization. The science was irrefutable. The evidence was staring back from the screen. The only thing left was the question, and it had to be asked. With fingers that trembled so violently the digits blurred, Alex navigated the phone's menu, the list of favorites, a short, intimate roll call of the very people who had constructed this lie. The name Mom and Dad glowed on the screen, a testament to a unified front that now seemed like a conspiracy. The tap to call was less a conscious decision and more a physiological reaction, a final desperate lunge for the solid ground that had just crumbled away. The ringtone echoed in Alex's ear, a cheerful, mundane sound that was utterly at odds with the cataclysm unfolding. Each trill was an eternity, a hammer blow against Alex's composure. Then, a click. The line connected, and the familiar warm voice of Alex's mother filled the void, asking about their day with its usual cadence of casual love. The normalcy of it was a fresh wound. Alex's own voice, when it finally came, was a foreign thing, a thin, strained whisper that cracked under the weight of the words it had to form. The question, rehearsed 100 times in the panic-stricken silence of the last hour, tumbled out, stripped of all preamble, all grace. It was a raw, naked thing, asking if they had another child. The silence that followed from the other end of the line was not merely an absence of sound. It was a void. It was a chasm opening up, swallowing the cheerful greeting and the pretense of a normal Tuesday afternoon whole. Alex could hear the faint, staticky hiss of the connection, could almost feel the air freezing in their parents' living room miles away. The silence stretched, becoming a tangible entity, heavy with shock and something else, something far more damning. Guilt. It was a confirmation more eloquent than any shouted denial could ever be. Then a rustle, the sound of the phone being fumbled, and a new presence on the line, deeper, quicker, a voice used to taking charge. Alex's father, his tone abruptly shifting from curiosity to a brusque, jarring deflection. He asked about the weather, about work, about anything but the question that hung in the digital space between them, its edges sharp enough to draw blood. His words were a wall, hastily erected, but Alex had already seen the truth in the devastating silence that had preceded them. Something was terribly, terribly wrong, and the people who had always been the source of all answers were now the source of the lie. The wall of his father's deflection did not hold for long. Alex's voice, no longer a whisper, but sharp with a pain that cut through the phone line, pressed again, refusing to be diverted by talk of weather or work. The name hung between them, a ghost-given form, Maya. The silence that had been damning now shattered into a flurry of choked admissions, voices overlapping in a messy, frantic jumble. Yes, they said. The word like a stone dropped into still water. Yes, Maya existed. But the explanations, the reasons, the story, those were locked away behind a wall of evasive half-sentences and pain deflections. It was a confession without absolution, an admission that only deepened the wound. The words from Alex's parents were vague, shrouded in a mist of regret and something that sounded like fear. They spoke of it being a different time, a complicated situation, a decision made for the best. But the best for whom? The question screamed in Alex's mind, a silent roar that drowned out their placating tones. Each non-answer was a fresh betrayal, a twist of the knife. This was not some distant relative or a minor family secret. This was a person, a sister, whose entire existence had been edited out of Alex's life with surgical precision. The foundation of trust, so carefully built over a lifetime of Christmases and scraped knees and whispered secrets, crumbled into dust, leaving Alex standing on a precipice of lies. A cold, hard anger began to replace the initial shock, crystallizing in Alex's chest. The feeling was desperate, clawing, a need for truth that was more vital than air. The argument that erupted was not loud, but it was fierce, a current of raw emotion crackling across the miles. Accusations of betrayal met with desperate pleas for understanding, creating a feedback loop of pain that neither side could escape. The conversation became a vortex, sucking all the light from the room, until there was nothing left but the hollow sound of their fractured voices. Finally, the words died in Alex's throat. There was nothing more to say to the two strangers on the other end of the line. The silence returned, this time heavy with finality. Without another word, Alex's thumb found the end call button, pressing it with a decisive finality that echoed in the sudden quiet of the study. The screen went dark, severing the connection. The phone was dropped onto the desk, as if it were contaminated. The betrayal was a physical ache, a cold stone in Alex's gut, but beneath it, a new resolve ignited, fierce and unwavering. They would not explain, so Alex would find out. The search was no longer a whimsical curiosity. It was a mission. Truth was out there, and Alex would tear the world apart to find it. The silence after the call was a living thing, thick and heavy in the dim light of the study. Alex sat motionless, the ghost of their parents' voices still echoing, a tangled web of evasion and shame that offered no real answers, only deeper shadows. The cold anger that had propelled the confrontation began to ebb, leaving behind a hollow, aching emptiness. But in that void, a new resolve took root, fragile yet unyielding. The truth would not come from the architects of the lie, would have to come from the one person who might be just as blindsided, just as lost. Maya. Alex's fingers, which had trembled with rage moments before, now felt numb as they navigated back to the DNA site. The dashboard loaded, a colorful, cheerful interface that felt like a cruel joke. There she was again, the same profile picture Maya, smiling under autumn leaves, a stranger who shared Alex's blood, his mother's eyes. For a long time, Alex just stared, tracing the familiar lines of her face, wondering what her voice sounded like, what her laugh was like, whether she ever felt a missing piece in her own life. The cursor hovered over the message button. 1,000 questions swirled, each one fighting to be first. Who are you? Did you know about me? Why did they give you away? Why did they keep you a secret? But each version felt too raw, too accusatory, a burden to place on someone who might be entirely innocent in this decades-old cover-up. Taking a deep, shaky breath, Alex began to type, the click of the keys unnaturally loud in the quiet room. The words appeared on the screen, hesitant and formal, each one weighed and measured. An introduction, first a name, a clumsy explanation of how they were connected, a mention of the DNA test that had appended everything. Alex asked the simplest, most terrifying question of all. Asterisk, did you know? The message was sent before courage could fail, a digital bottle cast into an uncharted sea. Then came the wait, longer and more agonizing than any that had come before. The wait for Maya's reply was a different kind of torment, slow ticking tension that stretched every second into an hour. Alex's world had narrowed to the screen of the phone, every buzz and chime sending a jolt of adrenaline through a system already frayed raw. The study, once a place of comfort, felt like a command center for a life that was no longer recognizable. Alex moved through the hours like a ghost, mechanically making coffee, attempting to work, all while one part of the mind remained perpetually fixed on that silent inbox, waiting for the seismic shift that a single message would bring. When the notification finally appeared, it was not with a fanfare, but a soft, almost apologetic chime. Alex's heart hammered against their ribs, a frantic drumbeat of fear and desperate hope. The subject line was a simple, your message, but it held the weight of a lifetime. Opening it felt like lifting a lid on a box that might contain either a treasure or a viper. Maya's words were not angry or defensive. They were drenched in a shock that mirrored Alex's own, a tremor that was almost palpable through the text. She wrote of a life built on a different foundation of secrets, of knowing she was adopted from infancy, of loving parents who were not her biological ones, of a childhood filled with its own questions about where she came from. But she had never, not in her wildest imaginings, considered the possibility of a sibling. The DNA match had been a bolt from the blue, a revelation that left her reeling, her own sense of identity suddenly and profoundly complicated. Her eagerness to connect was immediate and heartfelt, a raw, hopeful thread woven through her words. She asked about Alex's life, their childhood, the parents she had never known. There was a hunger there, a desire to grasp this new, unexpected branch of her family tree. Intertwined with that hope was a palpable wariness, a fear of reopened wounds. She spoke carefully of her adoptive family, of the love and stability they provided. and the delicate balance of integrating this explosive new truth without causing them pain or feeling disloyal. Her reply was a map of her own emotional landscape, a terrain of excitement, confusion, and a deep protective caution. She was stepping onto a bridge toward a brother she never knew she had, but she was testing each plank carefully, afraid the whole structure might collapse beneath them. The screen glowed in the dim quiet of the study, a portal to another life. Alex's palms were damp, heart thudding in nervous rhythm against their ribs. The cursor hovered over the video call icon, a simple button that felt like the edge of a cliff. With a breath held tight, Alex clicked. For a moment, there was only the swirling animation of connection, a digital void. Then, the screen resolved into an image that stole the air from Alex's lungs. It was her, Maya. Not a photograph anymore, but a living, breathing person sitting in a sunlit room miles away. Her face was slightly pixelated at first, then sharpened into focus, and the resemblance it was staggering. She had the same slight arch to her eyebrows, the same way of holding her head just so. Her eyes, wide with the same trepidation Alex felt, were their mother's eyes, unmistakably. A soft, almost disbelieving laugh escaped Maya's lips at the exact same moment one escaped Alex's. The mirrored reaction hung in the air for a second, a silent, profound acknowledgement of the shared genetics that had brought them to this impossible moment. There was no need for grand introductions. The familiarity was already there, written in the lines of their faces, in the hesitant half-smiles that were so eerily similar. The conversation began haltingly, a delicate dance around the edges of their shock. They spoke of small, safe things first, the weather in their respective cities, the books on the shelves behind each other. But the pull of the deeper truth was too strong to resist for long. Tentatively, Alex shared a story from childhood, a memory of a family vacation that had gone comically wrong. Maya listened to her expression, a mixture of fascination and sorrow, then offered a story of her own, a childhood moment of feeling different, of a quiet curiosity about where she came from that had always hummed in the background of her life. The stories began to flow more freely then, two separate streams merging into a single river of shared heritage. They spoke of their fears, their joys, the little quirks and mannerisms they'd each thought were uniquely theirs, now revealed as family traits. Alex noticed the way Maya tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, a gesture their father made a dozen times a day. Maya pointed out the similar slope of their shoulders, the shared habit of biting their lower lip when thoughtful. With each passing minute, the initial wariness melted away, replaced by a dawning, bewildering sense of connection. It was an instant bond, forged not by years of shared history, but by the shocking, immediate truth of blood. They were two halves of a story suddenly made whole, and the feeling was as comforting as it was confusing. The hour slipped away unnoticed, the world outside the window fading into darkness, as they sat illuminated by the screen. Two strangers who were not strangers at all, building a bridge across a chasm of lost years, with nothing but words and the profound, unshakable certainty of family. The glow of the video call had faded from the screen, leaving behind a profound and unsettling quiet. The warmth of connection, the startling familiarity in Maya's smile, now warred with the cold, hard reality of their parents' deception. They had shared a face, a history, a genetic blueprint, yet their lives had been cleaved apart by a secret so absolute it felt like a physical wall. The conversation with Maya had answered nothing. It had only deepened the mystery, making the need for answers a physical ache in Alex's chest. The truth was a locked door, and Alex was certain the key was hidden somewhere within the walls of the family home. The attic was the logical place to start, a dusty repository of a life carefully curated and presented. The pull-down ladder groaned in protest, a sound of long disuse, as Alex ascended into the still, hot air. The space was a landscape of cardboard boxes and old furniture shrouded in white sheets, smelling of aged paper and memories. This was not the search for a missing Christmas ornament or an old yearbook. This was an archaeological dig into a past that had been deliberately buried. Box after box was hauled into the weak circle of light cast by the single bare bulb. Alex's movements were methodical, driven by a grim determination. There were photo albums filled with images of a childhood that now felt like a carefully staged play, Alex as the sole star, their parents beaming supporting actors. Every picture was scrutinized, every date on the back of a photograph examined for discrepancies. For a telltale bulge in their mother's stomach that was never there. For a 9-month gap in the family timeline that had always gone unnoticed. The initial findings were mundane. Old tax returns, bundles of greeting cards, elementary school report cards praising a singular child. Frustration began to simmer, a fear that the secret was too well kept, that the evidence had been destroyed decades ago. It ducked at the bottom of a mildewed box labeled MISC, keepsakes, beneath a stack of their father's old engineering textbooks. Alex's fingers brushed against something that was not paper. It was a small, yellowed envelope, unmarked and forgotten. Inside was not a photograph, but something far more intimate. A thin, faded plastic hospital bracelet, its once white surface now the color of old bone. The name on it was their mother's, but the date printed in faint, smudged blue ink was wrong. It was from a year before Alex was born, and next to the date was a single, devastating word, a term that changed everything: obstetrics. Alex stared, the plastic strip feeling alien and electric in their hand. It was not just a date from the past. It was a ghost, the first tangible proof of a pregnancy, a birth, a sister whose existence had been systematically erased from the family record. The hidden bracelet was a crack in the perfect facade, and Alex was finally peering through. The faded plastic bracelet felt like a live wire in Alex's hand, humming with the energy of a truth long suppressed. The date, the word obstetrics, they were no longer abstract suspicions, but cold, hard facts. The attic, once a repository of benign nostalgia, now felt like a crime scene, each dust mote a silent witness to the lie. The person who might hold the key to the rest of the story was not apparent, whose walls of deflection were impenetrable, but their mother's sister, Aunt Laura. She had always been the family historian, the keeper of softer memories, the one with the easier smile and less guarded eyes. The drive to her modest suburban house was a blur of green lawns and winding streets. The normalcy of the neighborhood a stark contrast to the turmoil churning inside Alex. The bracelet was a heavy weight in a jacket pocket, a piece of evidence to be presented. Laura answered the door with her usual warm smile, but it faltered as she took in Alex's pale, determined face. The cheerful greeting died on her lips, replaced by a wary concern. She ushered Alex inside, into a living room smelling of lemon polish and dried flowers, a sanctuary that was about to be violated by a decades-old secret. Over cups of tea that went cold and untouched, Alex did not mince words. The DNA test was laid out, the match with Maya explained, the shocking silence from their parents described. Then, with a hand that only trembled slightly, Alex placed the yellowed hospital bracelet on the coffee table between them. The small piece of plastic seemed to suck all the sound from the room. Laura's face, usually so open and expressive, closed like a book. Her eyes, so like her sister's, filled with a deep, immediate sorrow. She looked from the bracelet to Alex's desperate, searching face, and the battle within her was visibly, lifetime of loyalty warring with the undeniable plea for truth. Finally, with a heavy sigh that seemed to carry the weight of all the lost years, her shoulders slumped in defeat. The story when it came was whispered as if speaking too loudly might make it more real. She spoke of a different time, a stricter household, a young girl, Alex's mother, terrified and alone. She revealed the teenage pregnancy, hidden under baggy clothes and fabricated illnesses, a shame so profound it was buried deep. She described the pressure from their own parents, rigid and unforgiving, who saw the unborn child not as a grandchild, but as a scandal to be erased. The adoption was not a choice but a mandate, a transaction conducted in hushed tones and sealed with a promise of eternal silence. It was a secret born not of malice, but of a deep, suffocating shame, a chapter of their mother's life that had been ripped out and burned, its ashes scattered to the wind so the family could pretend it had never been written at all. Laura's voice broke as she finished, tears tracing paths through her powder, her reluctant confession finally giving a name and a reason to the ghost who had haunted their family for nearly 30 years. The truth, once a sharp and painful shard, had been smoothed by understanding, its edges worn down by Aunt Laura's tearful confession. The shame, the pressure, the impossible choice made by a terrified girlet was a story that reframed the lie, transforming it from a malicious betrayal into a tragedy of circumstance. With the mystery solved, the frantic need for answers gave way to a deeper, more urgent longing. The need to finally stand in the same room as the sister who had been a secret for so long. The cafe they chose was neutral ground, a sunlit space with the warm scent of roasted coffee and baking pastries. Alex arrived early, nerves humming, fingers tracing the edge of the table. The decision to bring a small, worn teddy bear, a relic from their own childhood, felt both foolish and profoundly right. It was a tangible piece of the shared years they had lost, an offering, a bridge. Then the door chimed, and she was there. Maya stood silhouetted against the bright street, her eyes scanning the room before they landed on Alex. For a heartbeat, they simply looked at each other across the space, the video call familiarity crashing into the stunning reality of physical presence. Then, as if pulled by an invisible string, they moved toward each other. The embrace was not hesitant. It was immediate and fierce, a closing of a circuit that had been left open for a lifetime. Alex felt the solid reality of her, the warmth of her shoulder under his hand, the softness of her hair against his cheek. A sob caught in his throat, echoed by a shuddering breath from Maya, and they stood there in the middle of the bustling cafe, holding on to each other as if they might never let go, tears flowing freely for the childhood spent apart, for the bewildering joy of this impossible reunion. When they finally pulled back, hands still clasping each other's arms, as if to prove this was real, they found a quiet corner table. The words came in a soft, overlapping rush, punctuated by watery laughs and shared looks of wonder. Then came the mementos. Alex placed the faded teddy bear on the table. Maya's eyes welled up again as she reached into her own bag, pulling out a small framed photograph of herself as a young girl, holding an identical bear, a gift from her adoptive parents on her 5th birthday. The coincidence was breathtaking, a silent thread connecting their separate lives. They spent the next hour sharing these fragments, report card with the same messy handwriting, a story of a shared irrational fear of thunderstorms, a love for the same obscure children's book author. Each discovery was a brick laid in the foundation of their new relationship, each one highlighting the stark, aching truth of how much they had missed. They had not just missed knowing each other, they had missed growing up together, missed inside jokes and shared Christmases, missed being each other's first best friend. The loss was profound, but sitting there in the sun-dappled cafe, their hands wrapped around matching mugs of coffee, the overwhelming feeling was not of sorrow for the past, but of a fierce, hopeful gratitude for the future they would now build together. The warmth of the reunion with Maya still clung to Alex like a second skin, a fragile and precious thing, but it could not fully shield against the cold reality waiting at home. The confrontation with their parents was inevitable, a storm that had been brewing since the moment the DNA results had shattered their world. They arrived at the familiar house, the one that had always meant safety and truth, feeling like a stage set for a play whose script Alex had never seen. Jamie's steady presence at their side was an anchor in the churning sea of emotion. The air in the living room was thick with a tension so palpable it seemed to suck the oxygen from the space. Alex's parents sat on the edge of the sofa, their postures defensive, their faces etched with a pain that was both fresh and decades old. The explanations began not with anger, but with a weary, broken defensiveness. They spoke of their own youth, a time that felt like a different century, governed by rules and expectations that seemed archaic now. They painted a picture of two terrified teenagers, paralyzed by the judgment of their own rigid parents, facing a future that seemed to have collapsed around them. The pressure had been immense, a constant, suffocating weight that left no room for the choice they might have made in a different, kinder world. The adoption was described not as a decision, but as a sentence passed down by a generation obsessed with appearances, a shameful secret to be buried and never spoken of again. Their voices cracked, not with excuses, but with a raw, decades-old grief. As they begged for a forgiveness they clearly felt they did not deserve. Alex listened, a tempest of conflicting emotions raging within. The anger was still there, a hot, righteous flame at the Karanger for the lies, for the stolen years with Maya, for the fundamental betrayal of trust. It was a solid, dependable fury. But lapping at its edges was a treacherous tide of empathy, fed by the naked anguish on their parents' faces. They were not the infallible giants of Alex's childhood, but flawed, frightened people who had been broken by their own history and had spent a lifetime trying to glue the pieces back together into a perfect picture, leaving the most important piece in a box. The struggle was visceral, a war between the child who felt betrayed and the adult who could finally see the scars. Jamie's hand found Alex's, a silent, grounding pressure in the storm, a reminder that they did not have to navigate this churning emotional waters alone. The fallout was not an explosion, but a slow, painful settling of dust, revealing a landscape forever altered, where the path to forgiveness was long and fraught with the wreckage of the past. Months had softened the sharp edges of the revelation, sanding down the initial shock and hurt into something more manageable, more integrated. The truth, though it had arrived like an earthquake, had not destroyed the foundation of Alex's life. It had instead forced an expansion, adding new rooms to a house Alex had thought was complete. Sundays now often found Alex and Maya curled on opposite ends of the same sofa, a comfortable silence between them as they read or scrolled through phones, their presence as natural and unquestioned as the afternoon light slanting through the window. They had built a language of their own, shorthand of shared glances and half-finished sentences that spoke of a bond rapidly deepening, making up for lost time with a quiet, fierce dedication. Alex watched Maya laugh at something on her screen, the sound so familiar it was like hearing an echo of their own laughter, and felt a profound sense of rightness settle in their chest. The integration was seamless in its own messy, human way. Maya knew the code to the apartment door. Her favorite tea was always in the cupboard, and she had her own designated mug. She had sat through slightly awkward family dinners with Alex, his parents where the air was still thick with unspoken apologies and careful words, but was also there for lazy weekend brunches with just Alex and Jamie where the conversation was easy and filled with the mundane details of their lives. She was a thread now woven into the fabric of Alex's world, and the pattern was richer for it. Sitting there in the peaceful quiet, Alex reflected on the turbulent path that had led to this moment. The truth had been a wrecking ball, swinging through the carefully constructed narrative of their family, shattering illusions and leaving rubble in its wake. The pain of that impact had been real and searing. But from that rubble, something stronger had been built. The truth had not been kind, but it had been necessary. It had scoured away the pretense, forcing honesty where there had only been silence, and connection where there had been a void. The sense of family was no longer a simple, taken-for-granted fact. It was a choice, a conscious construction, and it was fuller and more authentic for having been earned. The new normal was not about forgetting the past, but about building a future upon its unvarnished, complicated truth, and in that, Alex had found a deeper sense of belonging than they had ever known was possible.